Hi there. I'm going to walk you through how to do charcoal studies in 15 minutes. Please go through the demos covered under level 1-1 and put in the practices. Okay, let's go through the materials. This is the charcoal powder as well as the squishy sponge. We have the charcoal sticks and pencils. This is the charcoal stick, which is made directly from a twig, and the charcoal pencils of different hardness and softness. And we have the erasers. I cut this out from a block of eraser. The yellow one just have these triangular blocks of erasers inside. This is an eraser pencil. It's much harder and I'm able to do very fine erasing. And this is a blending pen. A few more equipment than you thought you needed, right? Don't worry, we'll go through them in this demo. All right, let's start. First, dip the cosmetic sponge in the charcoal powder, then apply it on the paper. You can try to even it out, but it doesn't have to be perfect. In terms of the tonal value, try to achieve about 5. Okay, at the start, try not to outline the object, but instead observe where might be the areas of highlight. These are the areas which are lighter because it's receiving light from the light source. Gently erase or lift the charcoal off from the patch you did earlier. Don't try to overdo it at one shot. There's no necessity to define the shapes or work on the details. In fact, you want to keep it very loose. Just put in observe the lights and shadows and locate them on your canvas. Next, I jumped over to the left-hand side of the object because the contrast between the surface of the object and the background is especially strong there. As you observed, I'm not particularly paying attention to details at this point in time. Instead, I'm just solely focusing on the lights and shadows. In fact, I'm only paying attention to those values which are between 0 to 3 at the moment. Remember, when using an eraser, use the different edges as well as surfaces on the eraser and gently lift the charcoal off the paper. Remember, this is the first time you're getting to know your subject. It's not possible to nail it at one go. I just switched to the eraser pencil to do a much thinner highlight. The photograph that you see here is for reference and it's slightly different from my point of view. And as I develop the visual, other parts of the object would catch my attention. So based on the visual information that comes to me, I would move my equipment across the canvas and work on different parts. There's no sequence, there's no right sequence or wrong sequence to it, because eventually it's really about nudging and massaging the visuals into the final form. And you really don't know what the final form will be because you are studying the subject. I've heard people talk about you need to know what you're drawing before you draw. Now that's rubbish. It's not a study if you already know the subject. So a study is kind of like dating or befriending somebody and you're trying to know that person. So I'm trying to know my subject and I want to stay as open as possible without preconceptions. At this point, I picked up my charcoal stick and started working on the darker tones because the highlights have more or less been taken care of. You can see that the way I move my charcoal stick is rather loose. I'm trying to draw and observe at the same time, and hence it can't be perfect, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So slowly adding on areas that are darker. And as you continue to develop, you will observe again more visual information and you try to add on to your sketch. What is important at this point is not to be caught up with details. Instead, be mindful of the values that you have observed and established in your visual. In other words, all the highlights, shadows, and midtones continue to establish their relationship better instead of jumping into details. Because the moment you jump into details, there is a great tendency to over-darken and destroy the value structure that was based on your observation. You can see that although I don't have a lot of details on the sketch itself, but the sketch looks and feels like the subject that we are sketching. Okay, now that we have established the basic tonal value of the object in space, this is when I continue to enhance the value contrast and shapes of the subject matter. Let's talk a little bit about the eraser usage. The eraser has different edges as well as different surfaces. Like brushes, the strokes of erasing will be different as you use different parts of the eraser. In fact, you could see that I was flipping and turning the eraser like a roti prata. Concerning the realism of the sketch, there are different takes on that. Some think that you should draw it like a photograph to look real. But what is real? The camera is not exactly like our eye. In fact, it is a poor representation of what our eye sees. And we have two eyes instead of just one. So on the subject of realism, I always question people, is it photoreal or is it human real? Okay, here I switch to the harder charcoal pencil and using it to create the darkest values in the visual. As usual, be really gentle about it and slowly add it in. And because the charcoal pencil is rather hard, the markings that you make is going to be very dark. So I use the blender pen. This is where the blender pen comes in. Just like people who are using cosmetics, applying cosmetic to our face, using the blender pen to blend some of the shadings and generally to soften the shadings. Okay, so as a value study, it's more or less done. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritties of the study. It can always be better, but this is supposed to be a demo on how to do quick sketches. So you can stop here if you want. Some of you will ask, but the object is colored. You see the lighter silvery reflective top portion and the darker brown portion at the bottom. How do we represent it? Well, you can do it up to a point. So using the value study that you have done, you can start to treat the details, including the color representation. Now, do be very mindful that using charcoal, it is different from using pigmented paint, whereby you have various colors to use. On later lessons, I will cover extensively on color usage and color expressions. Okay, here I'm using a different eraser again to do the detailing of the object. So when you're adding these details, be very mindful to keep to the value structures that you have established earlier and not to override it or overwhelm it when you are doing the details. So the nice thing about working with charcoal is that it leaves very little scratches or markings on the paper that you're working on, and as a result of that, it's very easy to lift the charcoal off the paper with eraser. So hold the eraser as gently as you can when you work on such details. Don't be in a hurry to lift too much charcoal off the paper. Instead, gently work on it repeatedly to form the details, and use it with the charcoal stick interchangeably so that the details is a combination of undertone shading as well as overtone markings. Remember, when you're working on details, do be mindful of the value structures that you've created. Our mind actually perceives based on the broad structures, and details add to the information above the general structures. So the next question that comes to mind is, when should I stop? Well, there's no definite answer to that question. In this case, it's very much determined by the amount of time you have set aside to do this study. Most of the time, people get caught up with details and forgot about the general outlook of the subject matter. It is more important to make sure that the amount of information or details is in harmony as a whole. We are approaching almost the end of the sketch. Here I'm trying to give better definition to the right-hand side of the subject. I thought the value contrast between the surface of the object as well as the background could be better defined. So I'm using the eraser on its edge to gently scrape off some charcoal. Very importantly, what I've sketched so far is based on what my eyes see. The photograph that is provided for reference on the left is shot by a camera, and I won't use it as an answer to what the sketch is supposed to look like. Let's see how this can be applied by looking at François Dupuy. He's a French painter, sculptor, and engraver. You see this piece with walnuts in a bowl? With this exercise that I've just gone through with you, you should be able to do this piece even though it looks quite complicated at the beginning. So first establish the value structures and then add in the details. That's all to it. Thanks for watching. There will be more. Subscribe.